for joining us this afternoon for a listening session on the history of It's on Us. I'm so thrilled to be joined today by our three panelists who are all co-founders of It's on Us to talk today to all of us about how It's on Us got started. So I'd like to give you some background on our presenters. We're joined today by Kyle Lierman, who is the CEO of When We All Vote and Civic Nation. Previously, Kyle was a Senior Associate Director of Public Engagement and Senior Policy Advisor in the Obama White House. And during his 6 years at the White House, Kyle served as the liaison to athletes and leaders from the sports world, as well as to young Americans, education leaders, and the nonprofit and philanthropic communities. Kyle launched and led the It's on Us sexual assault prevention campaign and spearheaded several other successful public-private partnership efforts, including the launch of Michelle Obama's Better Make Room campaign. Before joining the White House, Kyle was the GOTV director in Louisiana in 2010 for Organizing for America, ran for state delegate in his hometown of Bethesda, Maryland, and served as a special assistant on the Obama-Biden transition team. Kyle is a proud graduate of George Washington University, where he majored in business. We're also joined today by President and CEO of the award-winning creative agency Mekanism, Jason Harris, who works closely with brands to create shareable and provocative campaigns that engage audiences. Under his leadership, Mekanism was named to Ad Age's Agency A-List, Creativity's Creative 50, Effie's Most Effective Independent Agencies, and he has been profiled by the New York Times, Fast Company, and ABC's Nightline. We are also joined today by Lynn Rosenthal, the president of the Center for Family Safety and Healing, which takes an integrated team approach to breaking the cycle of family violence and child abuse. Lynn, a nationally known champion for the prevention of family violence, previously served as the director of Violence Against Women initiatives for the Biden Foundation since 2017, where she advanced the foundation's programming to create cultural change towards ending domestic violence and sexual assault. From 2009 to 2015, Lynn was the first ever White House advisor on violence against women, coordinating efforts to address domestic and sexual violence. In this capacity, Rosenthal co-chaired the White House Task Force to protect students from sexual assault and led interagency collaboration to spark new prevention initiatives. Lynn also served as Vice President for Strategic Partnerships at the National Domestic Violence Hotline, Executive Director of the National Network to End Domestic Violence, and leadership positions at state domestic violence coalitions in Florida and New Mexico. We're so excited to be joined by our three presenters today. And without further ado, I'll pass it over to Lynn.
Well, thank you. And it's great to talk to all of you today. And I really want to recognize all the folks coming in and all the hard work you're doing. I usually say on the ground. Well, now I would say online, but you're still doing it. You're doing all this really intense organizing, and you're really carrying out the spirit of It's on Us. And so it's really a pleasure. When Evan was reading my bio, I was thinking, oh, is all that stuff really my life? But a highlight of it, of true honor and pleasure, was working with Kyle and Jason and others on the It's on Us campaign. So I just want to tell you a little bit about how it came to be, and then Kyle will kind of fill in a lot of the work that happened once we kicked off. But when I started at the White House in 2009, this effort goes all the way back to President Obama's first term. And I was working directly with Vice President Biden, and he asked me to look at all the data since the time of the passage of the Violence Against Women Act, which at that time had been 15 years, to see where we were, what was working and what wasn't, to reduce domestic violence and sexual assault. And what stood out right away is the high rates of violence that young teens and young adults were facing still after all the work that had gone on. So the indicator showed us that young women ages 16 to 24 had the highest rates of dating violence and sexual violence. That of victims of either of those two events, most of the violence occurs before the victim has reached her 25th birthday. So it's very clear that women are most at risk when we're young. That's the way that I would say it. And so when we saw that, we set about what we could do about it. And we brought researchers into the White House. We met with tons of advocacy groups and students. We identified a number of initiatives, and one of those was the 2011 Dear Colleague letter that kind of lives in infamy, but it's really what kicked off the policy work. That was the precursor to It's on Us. So we released the 2011 Dear Colleague letter, which really served as a blueprint for students. And now it seems so long ago, but it was so important at the time. And very soon we began to hear from a lot of students about their experiences on college campuses. We heard from a lot of activist groups who were concerned that even though this policy work was out there, it wasn't going to go far enough to address the real crisis of sexual assault on college campuses. And so we started looking at more we could do. This was also part of a whole of government approach. I can't say that enough. I can't emphasize that enough, that all of our different components in the federal government were working to address sexual violence. So everything from violence in the Peace Corps to violence in the military, our federal agencies were really working on these issues. And as a part of that, we continued to identify this real crisis on college campuses. And then in the second term, the White House Council of Women and Girls on Women and Girls really took this up and worked with President Obama. And in January of 2014, President Obama gave the first ever speech from the White House to the White House Council on Women and Girls about sexual violence. It continues to live in my memory. I will never forget it. And in fact, a shameless plug for this book that some of us wrote chapters in, West Wingers on the Obama White House. I have a chapter in this book about what it was like to sit in the East Room and hear President Obama give a speech about sexual violence. At the same time, we released a report called Rape and Sexual Assault, a renewed call to action, just laid out the problem of sexual violence, and created the White House Task Force to protect students from sexual assault, with a 90-day turnaround to President Obama with a report on recommendations. And one of the key recommendations in the report was what we heard from students and colleges and universities around the country, which was this really has to include a bystander intervention component. There's got to be a real focus on young men. And it really, a public awareness is as important as policy. And that's what we heard everywhere. Everybody we talked to said that. So, and in fact, Vice President Biden had held a series of virtual town hall meetings and sent a solicitation to students asking for their ideas to end sexual assault on college campuses. And the top response was get young men involved and work with bystanders. And so It's on Us really does all of that. So once the president got involved and we had the proclamation, or the executive order rather, creating the task force, then things really began to move really quickly. And I'll turn it over to Kyle, who then came in to help create the It's on Us campaign.
Thank you so much, Lynn. It's great to be back in a Zoom with you and with Jason. And I really also just want to say a huge thanks to the whole It's on Us team and the End Rape on Campus team. You guys have been doing a phenomenal job over the course, running this effort for many years, but really in the last couple of weeks, I've heard wonderful things about this virtual summit. And thanks to all of you for joining. As Lynn said, It's on Us is really, policy is always critically important, but the people part of it is just as important, and people engaging and people being the change that they wish to seek is just as important oftentimes. And so you all are the embodiment of that, and it's just incredible to see the interest and the engagement, and to hear the stories about the work that you all are doing day in and day out, either on your campuses or virtually on your campuses. And so thanks to everyone who's joined this and who's been a part of the It's on Us movement across the country. So I always start by saying I feel a sense of guilt that I wasn't helping Lynn earlier. This was an issue that, to be honest with you, I wasn't as knowledgeable about, as engaged on as I should have been when I was younger. And all this really came to a head at that event that Lynn talked about, when President Obama and Vice President Biden, I've never done that before. Vice President Biden announced the White House task force to protect students on campus. And I worked in the White House for about 6.5 years. I'm really an organizer at heart, but I'm also a little brother. And I got a call from my sister that day, and she just called to say, Kyle, can you please tell President Obama and Vice President Biden, thank you. I was raped when I was at Dartmouth. And she never told me that before. And so, she's my big sister, and she's sort of invincible in my mind. And I couldn't go tell Vice President Biden and President Obama, thank you, but I went and told Lynn, thank you. And Valerie Jarrett, who chaired the Council on Women and Girls, and Tina Chen, who was involved as well, thank you. And I basically said, how can I help? And we had just come off a big push to get folks enrolled in healthcare. And, that was a similar sort of public awareness effort where we were not just trying to pass policy, but we were trying to engage people across the country. And so Lynn and myself and a guy named Greg Schultz, who was the senior advisor to the vice president at the time, and Tina Chen and Valerie Jarrett, organized a meeting in the Roosevelt Room of some incredible people to discuss basically how could we make this not just about policy, but make this about a movement, and build on the incredible work that survivors in particular had done activating and organizing and fighting for their rights across the country. And I was so lucky that day that we invited a guy named Jason Harris, who was the CEO of Mekanism. And we had folks from sports leagues and the NCAA and media companies all in the room. But Jason was really the critical linchpin of the folks in the room. And I just remember the vice president saying, Jason, we need your help on this. And, after that, I literally held conference calls over the summer and spoke to survivors and activists and organizers. And I spoke to 435 student body presidents that summer across the country to say, how can we launch something that helps empower you on your campus across the country? And at that same time, Jason and his incredible team at Mekanism were building the It's On Us campaign. And so, that was just the start. And we launched it, and it took off across the country. It took off because of folks like you a few years ago that took this campaign and ran with it and made it real by organizing on your campus. And the thing that I really think about the most when I think about It's On Us is what I said earlier. I wasn't someone who was involved in this work before It's On Us. And what I hope It's On Us is doing for you, and what I hope It's On Us continues to do out across the country, is bring in new people, and especially young men, but everyone who might not otherwise have realized that they could play a role in stopping sexual assault on their campuses and supporting survivors on their campuses. And this is now a people-powered movement, a student-powered movement that you all are carrying forth in an incredible way. But as I said, Jason was really the linchpin in that first meeting and helped design and create It's On Us. And so, Jason, I'm excited to turn it over to you.
Great, thanks so much, Lynn and Kyle. It was really sort of the highlight of my career. I run an advertising agency, and I've been running an agency for about 15 years, and this was the first time that we had used our advertising powers for good. We're used to selling deodorant and ice cream, and athletic brands, and getting people to sign up for entertainment to watch. And this was the first time we used the same skills we would use to build any brand to fight for something and to try to end rape culture. And what that did for us as an organization and as a company was really transformative. And the ability to use that talent that we use in the private sector, that brands hire us and pay us, good money to help build their brands. to do that for a pro bono nonprofit cause really inspired us, and it's been amazing. And you know, I do have a bit of imposter syndrome because we can come up with a great idea and build that brand, but it takes, you know, EROC and IOU and all the people behind it to really take that message and lift it up and make it move. You know, all the best ideas in the world and all the best design and all the best, you know, creative, without the movement part, it goes nowhere. And so, you know, we really just sort of worked with Kyle and Lynn and VP Biden to sort of get the message off the ground, but it was the power of the group underneath it that really made it go. And you know, I can sit on these Zooms and talk about coming up with the idea and how great it is, but without the work that everyone does day in and day out, it would be really hollow. So, you know, I do fight that sometimes. One story about being in that Roosevelt room that I always talk about, and you know, Kyle act like I just said we would do it, but he kind of roped me into it. He was like, just come, you know, meet the vice president, see if you're interested. Little did I know, you know, Biden has this sort of persuasive pull of positivity when you're around him, and he could have easily gone the negative persuasive route and said, you run an ad agency, isn't it time you did something good for the world, instead of just, you know, keeping capitalism going. But the way he did it was so inspirational. He said, you know, he did it in a, imagine if we could make a difference. Imagine if we could change the way, what's happening on college campuses all across the country. Imagine the possibilities. The way he pitched it compelled me to get my entire company, you know, to work for free and get behind it, because it was such a positive, inspirational message of what we could do together. And I think that, you know, taught me infinite lessons in terms of persuasion and running a company that I still use to this day. And you know, I know Biden's a big topic of conversation these days, but he really is truly an inspirational person when you're in the room with him. And Kyle, I think, knew that, and you know, got me in the room, and I was saying yes before I knew, you know, what I was signing up for. So that's my story.
Well, Elvin, I'd love to, I think, do we want to open it up for questions, or what's the best sort of next step here?
Absolutely. Thank you all so much for sharing that. We would love to do a Q&A. So if anyone has questions, please feel free to post them in the chat. And I also have received a couple already. So I'll just start off with, this question is for Jason. What has been your favorite creative campaign It's On Us has run?
I really loved the original work I loved, but I think the Betsy DeVos campaign I thought was One Shitty Gift. I don't know if I'm assuming everyone's seen that. That to me, I know I love the original work, of course, and how we launched it, but that to me was I liked it. Had a little bit of a bite to it, so I like that work a lot.
Yeah, and for those of you who don't know, the One Shitty Gift creative campaign that we did with Mekanism actually helped drive over 120,000 comments opposing the Title IX rule changes that have been proposed that were put forward by the Department of Education.
We're gonna have to do some changes shortly on, you know, fixing Title IX again.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
This question is really for all of you. I guess we can just go around the horn, but what do you think the future of campus sexual assault prevention organizing looks like, especially being in this time of a pandemic for college students who are attending classes virtually now almost across the board?
Well, it's going to be what you all make it be. I think that's really the answer. And we probably can't even quite envision what you'll come up with. You know, when I would travel around and visit with the It's on Us groups, I was always struck by how each campus took it and made it their own. So, for example, I remember when we went to the University of Miami, and this was after I had left the White House. And what we saw in action was It's on Us had that particular campus had It's on Us ambassadors, if you will, or liaisons to various sectors. So there was an It's on Us ambassador to athletics, and It's on Us ambassador to the Greek community, and It's on Us ambassador to the healthcare center. And that was phenomenal. But nobody came up with that except the local activists that campus organized. And I hadn't seen that anyplace else. But then when we went to Rutgers, we saw a whole different kind of energy where people were using theater and other kinds of organizing tools. So I think it's going to be what you make of it, and particularly what you make of it in this online environment. I think I've seen beautiful events take place online, really well done events. So you can either kind of do it very organically and bring people together online and have great conversations, but you could also produce a video with great music and art and poetry and creative work that gets across the message about sexual assault. And one of the great things about the online environment that I'm really seeing is that I get to go to events and hear speakers. It would have cost me thousands of dollars to travel to and be in the room. So I think you can create a lot of ways for organizing across campuses. So you can now talk to the people. You could organize an event with the people at the University of Miami or wherever the school is that's doing something very different than you're doing. So I think the cross-fertilization, the the gender context has changed since we started this. So back in that day, we would have said, we talked about young men, and I think our language was probably even G and C, gender nonconforming. You can tell language has changed so fast. Today, we would say non-binary folk. So what you have to figure out, and I know Elvin has really worked on this with groups, is how do you make this messaging work for everybody? So it's bystander awareness. It was initially targeted towards young men to get young men engaged, guys who had the experience that Kyle described. But what does it mean today with changing notions of gender? How can you really make that work? And what does it mean in the context of racial justice? And who's most affected by sexual assault? And who do campuses not respond to? Who gets the worst response from campuses and authorities in the community? And how can messaging be for everyone? So I think you have a lot to do, and I'm really excited at seeing what you do with all that.
I just say, I think this is a really hard time for everybody, but certainly it's an incredibly difficult time for students. And, one thing I would just say is, and, I try to do this in my own life right now, but it just making sure, even though you're not there in person, that you are there for each other online. And I know we've been holding a number of survivor conversations, and Kenyora and Tracy and Sylvia and others have been doing phenomenal work on that. But be present even though you can't be present. And I think that I hope that there's an opportunity with this to continue to expand, to reach out to students that are more non-traditional students. I mean, there's tons of students that aren't at campus all the time anyway.
Right.
There's tons of students that are at community colleges and that are commuter students. And so making sure that we're reaching those non-traditional students in a significant way as well.
Thanks so much for that, Kyle. I actually can personally relate, since I went to a community college myself and then finished the rest of my degree fully online. And often.
Have you finished yet, Elvin? I thought you were still going.
No, I graduated.
All right. I'm joking. I'm really old, so I like to remind Elvin how young he is.
Well,
It's not fair when you say you're old, Kyle.
You're not old. Another question that we have, and this again goes to all of you, but what brings you hope in this tough time for the movement to end gender-based violence, especially since we're all not going back to campus in the fall?
So You know, I would just say, and I think this is sort of a broader point, um, It's on Us is not in the front page of the Washington Post or on the front page of, you know, on air on CNN right now. There's a lot of stuff going on, but, you know, the thing that gives me hope is that what happens with movements is that the folks, like the people on this call, are in the trenches and doing the work. Honestly, and I say this to encourage you, not to discourage you, but doing the hard work of organizing for decades, sometimes for years at a time, before you hit this crescendo moment. And the two best examples I can give you of that, and I know I'd imagine Lynn shares this, but, you know, in the LGBTQ movement, for decades, people were organizing around marriage equality and fighting for it, and it wasn't on the front page, and it wasn't front of mind for everyone. And then literally, and our board chair and my always boss, Valerie Jarrett, always says, then movements then strike like lightning. And the Supreme Court ruled that marriage equality was the law of the land. And we just, in some ways, had a similar moment like that around racial justice, where people have been organizing around fighting police violence and racial justice for decades, for centuries in some instances. And they're not always on the front page. They're not always top of mind for everyone. But because of the work that people have been doing for that long period of time, it created the ability to have the moment that we had in May and June, where people really started to wake up to the issue, and change came much more rapidly than it did before. And I think that you all should just know, you know, movements ebb and flow in terms of their sort of, you know, being huge in the sort of national conversation. And It's on Us has been huge as a part of the national conversation. Gender-based violence has been huge. We're not at that sort of peak moment right now, but this work that you all are doing is laying the groundwork for the next peak moment, when we're going to have a huge sort of lightning bolt that continues to push the conversation and the change forward. And so it's not as easy to be working on an issue that's not as top as mind for everybody as it is to do it when something's in the spotlight, but it is just as, if not more important, to be doing that work then. And so what's inspired me recently is to see how fast change can come, but that change can only come fast when people like yourselves have laid the groundwork for it. So that's what I think is so critical right now that you all are doing, is you are continuing to lay the groundwork and do the hard work of organizing on your campuses so that when that next big moment comes, real change will happen.
I think that's right. And I think that being online gives you a chance to really study and dig into a particular issue, so that when you come back on campus, you really can think about what you want with Title IX, what you want with public awareness like It's on Us. So it gives you a chance to really, it's sometimes caught up in the moment. Activists don't always have that time. So this does give you that time to really dig in, maybe in small discussion groups, which can be more intimate online. The best work I ever did in my life was in small, we called them cells, but small groups of people really figuring out our analysis, figuring out what it was we really wanted to do. And so I think you can do that now. You can start connecting with people online. That wave of activism that Annie Clark and Andrea Pino led from UNC, that all happened kind of connected with people all around the country. So you can still do that and put together small discussion groups. But what I want to say gives me hope are the youth coming up behind. So when I was at the Biden Foundation a couple of years ago, we did a series of listening sessions with high school groups all around the country, everywhere from rural Maine to New Mexico to the west side of Chicago and Los Angeles. And uniformly, the youth were really engaged in this as an issue, and the young men were really engaged in this as their issue. And some 16-year-old kid said at one point in our conversation, look, all we have to do is overthrow the patriarchy. And I said, oh, my work is done. My life's work. And then this young woman piped up and said, and the gender binary is dead. And we need to understand that. And I thought, okay, the future's in good hands. So I know it feels really hard right now if you're at home or you're, in an apartment or something by yourself or with a small group of folks. You feel really isolated. But this is really, times of isolation are also times of growth. And so what's percolating for you in these kind of dark times right now? And then how can you bring that forward when you are able to go back on campus?
I think that's well said. Just running a business, I use this time because it's hard for everyone. And I think using this time to think about what the things that you've always wanted to change or the different approaches you wanted to do for a movement or your business or personally, whatever it is during this time. This is the time when you have that time, as Lynn said, to have critical thinking versus just going and going and going because there's the next event or the next in-person summit or the next whatever it might be, part of the movement or the next crisis. Allowing yourself to not be stressed out that the lack of action happening now, but to use this as a retooling time so that when you are back in action, you've really thought things through or can approach it from a new way. And I think that's a really, really great use of time now where you don't feel like you're sitting on your hands, but you can also think about when you're back on campus, what are new things you want to try that can really make a huge difference. I think it's a good way to leverage the time for thinking, which is a lot of times we don't get that time to think.
This question is particularly for Lynn, but I'd love to hear from all of you. Sometimes, and I don't think I just speak for myself, but I feel left out of the conversation as a student of color. How can this movement expand to be more inclusive, and what can we do to hold the movement and each other accountable?
Lynn, I think you're on mute.
Somebody said that's going to be the most used phrase of 2020. You're on mute. Well, first of all, women of color are leading the conversation today. And I think for a lot of us, white women, white students, white activists, is a chance to step back and listen, because the leadership of Me Too and Time's Up and all of these efforts today are really being led by women of color, and women of color who are speaking about the issue in a way that's so relatable for everybody. So that's the first thing is, for white students, not to feel like you're the one who always has to be in the lead. And for students of color, for white students to support students of color in that leadership, and for students of color to really work in the way that feels the most organic to you. And I know that's a challenge because people don't always respond to that. There's sort of this different, there's this really great piece that I have worked with is the habits of white supremacy in the nonprofit organizations. And it really talks about this very linear, directive, top-down way of working as what needs to change in all of our nonprofits, all our activist groups, to just get rid of the habits of white supremacy and work in a really different way. So I want to ask white students to really embrace that. And students of color to be in the lead of all of that. And I do think, I don't know if allyship is the right word. I struggle with that framework, but the working together to have white students know when to step back. Students of color needs on the agenda with campus administrators because they're often not. So in educating your administration, not only about sexual violence, but about the intersectionality with race. Students of color voices have to be at the table for that. So I think it's another thing that we can all work on in this particular time is how can white people kind of get their own stuff under control so that they can step up or step back according to what's called for in the moment. So I take your point and I look to, the really strong leadership, Joanna Smith, Tarana Burke, the women of color who are really leading the conversation. All of us need to be listening.
I would also just add, being intentional about proactively reaching out to all folks of all backgrounds and all interests. Diversity can take a lot of different forms, and what I sort of said this at the beginning, but one thing I would really sort of challenge folks on this call to do is try and bring people in who might not look at themselves as activists. You need everybody, you need to be able to reach and engage as many folks on your campus as possible. So being intentional about proactively reaching out to, that athlete who might not have been engaged in a social justice issue before, that fraternity or sorority member who might not have been engaged in a social, an activist issue before. So there's a huge number of folks that you can reach out to about this issue. And I think you'd be surprised by how, if you as an organizer, someone who's working on your campus on this issue, how you can broaden the tent of folks that are engaging on this issue on your campus.
I want to give this example of taking the issue of race head on, also acknowledging that it was a number of years ago. But when I worked at the Florida Coalition Against Domestic Violence, we were organizing in rural communities around domestic violence and sexual and rape. And we kept running up against sort of a lack of understanding about race and services and who could get them or who couldn't. So we did a survey of rural communities, people within the sphere of influence. We did a survey, we identified it by race, and the questions were, is there a problem with race in our community, and can everybody get services or something? I can't remember exactly. No surprise to the folks of color on this call that when the survey came back, all the white people said there's no problem with race in this community, and all the people of color said yes, there's a terrible problem and lots of barriers because of race in our community. But what that allowed us to do is figure out where we could locate our services, where it was safe to do so for people. So I would just sort of not be afraid to talk about the issues in an intersectional way. It is about gender, sexual violence, and it's also about race, who commits it, who suffers from it, who's accountable, who's not held accountable. And so to do it in that sort of way, we really want campuses to do climate surveys around sexual violence, but I'm sure there are efforts to do the same around race. So to kind of bring those two things together, one survey question could be, do you feel that some students don't get the same kind of response when they try to come forward with claims of race or something like that? And just to put it out there so that then you can organize around it and not to be afraid of it. And I love what Kyle just said about it's not always the natural activists. That's what I found too, like people who look at a survey like that or an effort like that and say, oh, maybe I do fit in here somewhere.
Thanks, Kyle and Lynn. And Kyle, you mentioned being intentional about all of the people that we're reaching out to from all groups. And at It's On Us, part of our mission is making sure that we're including everyone in the fight to combat campus sexual violence, particularly in including young men. How can we continue to do so at It's On Us?
Well, it's an interesting challenge. I hope It's On Us as a brand and as a campaign is helpful generally, but I think the first step is sort of, as I said, just being proactive and not afraid to reach out to folks who you might not think are traditionally working on this issue. And I'm an organizer at heart, so we, when I started organizing, one of the first things we learned was how to do a one-on-one. And that's basically, you identify someone who you want to get engaged and you reach out to them and you say, can I set up in this world, a virtual coffee with you and talk to you about an effort that I'm working on and see if you're interested. And basically in those one-on-one conversations, you're sharing your story about why this work is important to you. And then you're getting to know the person on the other end of the computer, and learning about how this issue may not have affected them or may have affected them. But then you're also sort of showing this person a path on how they can use their voice and their time and their energy to make a difference on it. Because, I think, and again, I say this with enormous guilt, like I didn't work on this issue when I was in college. I honestly also was never, not that it should have taken this, but I was never approached by anyone to work on this issue in college. And you have to, not everybody's going to find you. You have to invite people in. And if you invite people in, and if you take time to build relationships with people, and if they might, a lot of people on the Obama campaign, we used to say that people came in the door because of Barack Obama, but they stayed because of the organizer. And a lot of people are going to work on this issue, not just because of the issue itself, but because of you, and because of your passion, and because of your drive, and because of their relationship with you. And so you all are the ambassadors for this effort on your campus. And don't be afraid to invite more people in, and people who haven't worked on this. And, you're not going to get everyone. I'm sure some of your emails aren't going to get responded to, or your DMs or your text messages, and that's fine. That's the worst that can happen in a lot of these instances. But you're going to get 25% or 50% or 75% of those people are going to respond, and you're going to get them thinking about this. And then you're going to turn them into an organizer and them into an ambassador on this issue. And that is so powerful. And so I think that it is really just about proactive outreach. And then also, Lynn talked about the different groups that were on the campus in Miami, being strategic about making sure that you're breaking into all the networks on the campus. So how are you reaching out to college Republicans and college Democrats? How are you reaching out to fraternities and sororities? How are you reaching out to athletes? How are you, reaching out to the different affinity groups that are on campus? Making sure you have inroads with each of those communities so that you can create someone who is your organizer to that group. It's sort of, we call it the snowflake model. There's a person that's the center of it, but you have to create additional points outside, and then those folks basically are working for you if you're doing your job as an organizer. And so it's just really about being not afraid to reach out to people who you don't know, not afraid to reach out to some people who might not have worked on this before, and then being smart about making sure that you're reaching out to the networks for folks where you need to make sure you're reaching people. And we talked about this in a little bit at the beginning, but 98, I think is it 98% of sexual assaults are committed by men. So, at the end of the day, getting men engaged is so critical to changing the culture on a college campus and to stopping sexual assault and to creating an environment in which survivors are supported. The problem is not going to be solved unless men are engaged. And so, Lynn always taught me, when you're working on sexual assault, it's important to engage men, but it's always important that they report to a woman. And so I always have. And so
I'm not sure I said report to, but have accountability
okay,
to.
have accountability. Fair. Okay. Well, so my board
that's how he heard it.
Well, I reported to Lynn on this one. So, but and our board chair is Valerie Jarrett, and Tina Chen, and women who are deeply steeped in this issue. And so I'm accountable to them. And so I think, that's that's something that stuck with me for a long time.
So one framework that just to sort of capitalize on what Kyle said, and I'll be real quick, but a framework that I always keep in mind, and when we created the original It's On Us campaign, it's really, and when you think about what you can do during this time and how to reach out, I always think about, because I'm an ad guy, so I always think about like simple, memorable ways to take action and handles. And what we always would talk about is, first of all, simplify. What is the thing you're trying to do, and how do you say it in a very memorable way. It's on Us does that because it's broad and encompassing. Inspire. What is a way to, when you reach out to someone, to inspire them to want to be involved? What is that way that you can trigger them to say that's something that I want to be involved with? And then the final one is involve. So simplify, inspire, and involve. And if you follow that format, I think whoever you reach out to, you're going to get a really high conversion rate. And it's a really simple formula that's super effective, but it cuts out a lot. A lot of it is the power of editing and not trying to throw 700 messages at people. But really, if you're trying to recruit someone, think about that simple approach. You know, simplify the message, inspire them in a really clear way, and then tell them what involvement you want from them. That's a real good way. Hopefully that's useful, but that's a framework that I always use. It's really effective in marketing.
Great. Thank you so much, all of you. Just want to put one final call out there for any additional questions in the chat. All right, it doesn't look like we have any more questions. So thank you so much, Lynn, Jason, and Kyle. We really appreciate you being here today and talking about the history of It's on Us and your continued dedication to the movement to combat sexual violence on campus.
Thank you.
Thank you all. Thanks, everybody.